Absolutely. And I think it bears mentioning, uh, coincidentally, that exactly 60 years ago, Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, was in Gaza exactly 60 years ago, September 1964. Um, and he went there and he came back and he wrote about what he saw and what he experienced. And what's interesting to me is he quickly identified exactly what Israel was. He said, this is a colonial outpost of the United States. It was first a tool of the British, and now it's a tool of the United States of America in order to maintain its control and disruption of the Middle East and North African region. I would encourage everyone to go read exactly what he wrote when he came back from Khan Yunis in Gaza. But when these conversations come up, we haven't really had a chance to address it externally with everything that's been going on. Every single day or 2 or 3 days, something keeps coming up. But when we have these conversations, we like to draw people's attention to the fact that Malcolm had a very interesting quote in which he said, "Chicken's coming home to roost," right? We are directly tied here in the United States to the violence that happens abroad, materially, but also spiritually. So this may be controversial, but this was something I had a conversation with someone about, and he talked about the conversation that happens around school shootings, most recently the one in Georgia. He talked about, in a spiritual sense, how the violence that the United States of America has been exporting abroad is coming home. It's coming back. We have exported a culture, we have exported many cultures, but mostly a culture of violence and destruction and death that we then glorify in our entertainment consumption. And he goes, what did people really think would happen? That we would just be isolated from everything we've been subjecting the rest of the world to? It was a very eye-opening conversation I had with a black pastor back when I was in high school. I didn't understand it back then, but I understand it now. And so when we talk about how it's intertwined, do people realize that police officers in the United States are trained by the Israeli military? A lot of people don't know that. Back in 2019, when I was in Palestine, I saw with my own eyes an Israeli soldier with having a Palestinian on the ground with his knee on that man's neck in 2019. 2020 in COVID, I saw that exact same video, that same image, that same scene play out with George Floyd. There's no distinction. That violence over there is the same as that violence here. They're trained over there. They're trained by an army that is occupying a people and then using those methods here upon people here, specifically Black Americans. And so you really can't separate it. You really can't. I mean, we just saw two politicians, Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, who I have disagreements with. I do. But at least they were working towards the betterment of their constituency. And their opponents were funded by numbers we'd never seen before in order to ensure that they lost. And now they've been replaced by people who don't care about the communities that they supposedly represent. They don't. The only reason they're there is because they're saying, I prioritize Israel. What happens to that constituency that was represented? What's going to happen to them? They're not really going to have a voice anymore. That effect is taking place here. That damage and harm is taking place here. We can go on and on. We can go on and on and on. And the very basic argument is, tax dollars that can be used for the betterment of our communities here is being sent over there. It's a never-ending list. Taking all that and putting it to the side, right? Let's just put all that to the side. Say it doesn't exist. At a very basic level, if I walk outside my house and I see a fire far away at the edge of my neighborhood, and I say, well, that fire's all the way over there. It's not really my problem. They'll take care of it, or they should take care of it. And I go back inside. When I come back outside and I find that same fire is now at my doorstep, it has gotten 10 times bigger, 100 times bigger, 1,000 times bigger, because it has just been left to consume unchecked. Had I grabbed a pail of water and rushed over there to help, this is when we talk about society and community, rushed over there to help, I would have been fighting with my community a small fire. And now I'm fighting something so immense that it's just going to overwhelm me. We can't distance ourselves from what's happening just because it's across the ocean. A lot of people like to say, that's a foreign policy. I want to focus on domestic. It's like, no, they're the same thing. It's going to affect you. It's absolutely going to affect you. One of the tragedies of a human being is that oftentimes we do not consider the consequences of our words and our actions 10 steps down the line, 20 steps down the line. We don't consider the consequences unless they are directly in front of our face, and even then, people are sometimes unable to do that. But there is a ripple effect that takes place. And when people ask us, aren't you afraid of what a Trump presidency will bring? Yeah, of course I'm worried. Of course I'm afraid. You'd have to be stupid not to be afraid. But why is no one considering the ramifications, the disastrous ramifications of what would happen if a party, and particularly a politician, who is number 2 to Biden, who, as John Kirby said, has been a full partner in the administration's policy with regard to Gaza, meaning they've been a full partner in this genocide. Is anyone not considering the ramifications of what happens if they are allowed to carry out this genocide, funding it, backing it, supporting it, being mouthpieces for it, and still win an election because the other side is supposedly worse? Is no one afraid of those ramifications? Do you understand what happens if they are allowed to just slice people to pieces over there and still win? They're allowed to support the live streaming of a genocide over there and still win. Has no one thought about those ramifications? Have we even begun to consider how disastrous they would be? I genuinely believe if people took the time to understand those ramifications, we would be having a completely different conversation right now. So in a material level, we are not separated by what's happening over there. And I'm not saying this as a Palestinian. I'm not saying this as someone who has family in Palestine. I'm not saying this as someone who, in the early weeks after October 7th, found out 15 members of his family were killed in a single missile strike. I'm not saying this as any of that. I'm saying this as a human being who's saying, this cannot be normalized. And if it is normalized, if genocide and ethnic cleansing is normalized, if we rally behind a politician who was just now endorsed by Dick Cheney, the architect of one of the most horrific foreign policy disasters and destabilizations of that entire region in modern history, if all of that is normalized, then what's going to come afterwards is much darker, much more horrific, much more destructive than anyone can possibly fathom.
Saturday with Renee.